In this video, you're going to learn how to set up the test suite for the To-Do API, similar to what we did in the test section, and we'll be writing 2 test cases for /to-dos. We're going to verify that when we send the correct data as the body, we get a 200 back with the completed doc, including the ID. And if we send bad data, what we expect back is a 400 with the error object. Now, before we can do any of this, we do have to install all of those modules we installed in the test section. Expect for assertions, Mocha for the entire test suite, supertest to test our express routes, and nodemon. Nodemon is going to let us create that test watch script we had so we can automatically restart the test suite. Now, I know you have nodemon installed globally, but since we are using it inside of a package.json script, it's a great idea to install it locally as well. We're going to run npm I with expect version 1.20.2, the most recent. Next up is going to be Mocha. The most recent version is 3.0.2. After that is nodemon, version 1.10.2. And last but not least is supertest at version 2.0.0. With this in place, all we have to do is tack on that save dev flag. We do want to save these, but not as regular dependencies, therefore testing purposes only, so we're going to save them as dev dependencies. Now we can go ahead and run this command, and once it's done, we'll be able to start setting up the test files inside of Atom. Over inside of Atom, inside of my package.json file, I now have my dev dependencies listed out. Now, my output for this command might look a little different than yours. NPM is caching some of my modules that I've installed recently. So as you can see here, it's just grabbing the local copy. They did indeed get installed though, and I can prove that by opening up the node modules directory. With this in place, we're now going to create a folder inside of server where we can store all of our test files. And this folder is going to be called tests. And the only file we're going to worry about creating for this video is a test file for server.js. I'm going to make a new file in tests called server.test.js. This is the extension we used in the previous section. It's the extension we'll be using for test files in this section as well. Inside of the server test file, we can now kick things off by requiring a lot of those modules. We're going to require the supertest module and expect. Mocha and nodemon do not need to be required. That's not how they're used. Const expect will get equal to require expect, and we'll do the exact same thing for supertest. Const request equals require supertest. Excellent. Now that we have these in place, we do need to load in some of our local files. We need to load in server.js so we have access to the Express app. We need that for supertest. And we also want to load in our to-do model. As you'll see a little later, we're going to be querying the database, and having access to this model is going to be necessary. Now, the model already exports something, but server.js currently exports nothing. We can fix this by adding module.exports to the very bottom, setting it equal to an object. On that object, all we're going to do is set the app property equal to the app variable using the ES6 object syntax. With this in place, we are now ready to load those 2 files in. First up, let's go ahead and create a local variable called app, and we're going to be using ES6 destructuring to pull it off of the return result from requiring the server file. Here, we're going to start by getting the relative path. Then we're going to go back one directory from tests into server. Then the file name is simply server without the extension. And we can do the exact same thing for the to-do model as well. We're going to make a constant called to-do. We're using ES6 destructuring to pull that off of the export. And the file is from the relative path back a directory. Then we have to go into the models directory, and finally the file name is called to-do. And now that we have all of this loaded in, we are ready to create our describe block and add our test cases. I'm going to use describe to group all of the routes. I'm going to have multiple test cases for some routes, and it's nice to add a describe block so you can quickly glance at the test output in the terminal. The describe block for post to-dos will simply be called post/to-dos. Then we can add our arrow function, and inside of here we can start laying out our test cases. The first test is going to verify that when we send the appropriate data, everything goes as expected. It should create a new to-do. Excellent. Now we can add our callback function. This function is going to take the done argument because this is going to be an asynchronous test. You have to specify done, otherwise this test is not going to work as expected. In here, what we're going to do is create a variable called text. This is the only setup data we really need. We just need a string, and we're going to use that string throughout. Go ahead and give this any value you like. I'm going to use test to do text. Perfect. Now it's time to start making that request via supertest, which we've done in the past. Now we only made get requests previously, but post requests are just as easy. We're going to call request, passing in the app we want to make the request on. Next up, we're going to call .post, which sets up a post request. We're going to go to /todos, and the new thing is actually sending data. In order to send data along with the request as the body, we have to call send, and we're going to pass in an object. This object is going to get converted to JSON by supertest, so there's no need for us to worry about that. Just another great reason to use the supertest library. In here, we're going to set text equal to the text variable above, and we can use the ES6 syntax like this to get that done. Now that we've sent the request, we can start making assertions about the request. First up, the status. I'm going to expect that the status equals 200, which should be the case when we send across valid data. After this, we can go ahead and make an assertion about the body that comes back. We want to make sure the body is an object and it has the text property equal to the one we specified up above. That's exactly what it should be doing when it sends the body back right here. Over inside of server.test.js, we can get that done by creating a custom expect assertion. If you remember, our custom expect calls do get past the response, and we can use that response inside of the function. We're going to expect that the response body has a text property and that text property equals, using to be, the text string defined above. If that's the case, great, then this will pass. If not, that's fine too. We're just going to throw an error and the test will fail. Now the next thing we need to do is call end to wrap things up, but we're not quite done yet. What we want to do is actually check what got stored in the MongoDB collection. This is why we loaded in the model up above. Instead of passing done into end like we did previously, we're going to pass in a function. This function will get called with an error, if any, and the response. This callback function is going to allow us to do a few things. First up, let's handle any errors that might have occurred up above. This would be if the status wasn't 200 or if the body does not have a text property equal to the text we sent in. All we have to do here is check if an error exists. If an error does exist, all we're going to do is pass it into done. This is going to wrap up the test, printing the error to the screen, so the test will indeed fail. I'm also going to return this result. Now, returning it doesn't do anything special. All it does is it stops the function execution. So anything we have down below is not going to run. Down below, we're going to make a request to the database, fetching all the to-dos, verifying that our one to-do was indeed added. To do that, we have to call todo.find. Now, todo.find is really similar to the MongoDB native find method we used. We can call it with no arguments to fetch everything in that collection. In this case, we'll be fetching all of the to-dos. Next up, we can attach a then callback. We're going to get this function called with all the to-dos, and we can make some assertions about that. In this case, we're going to assert that the to-do we created does exist. Right here, we'll get started by expecting todos.length to equal to be the number 1, because we've added one to-do item. We're going to make one more assertion. We're going to expect that that one and only item has a text property equal, using to be, the text variable we have up above. If both of these pass, then we can be pretty sure that everything worked as expected. The status code is correct, the response is correct, and the database looks correct as well. Now it's time to call done, wrapping up the test case. Now we're not done quite yet. If either of these fail, the test is still going to pass. What we have to do is tack on a catch call. Catch is going to get any errors that might occur inside of our callback. Then we're going to be able to take that error argument and using an arrow function, we're going to be able to pass it into done just like this. Notice here I'm using the statement syntax as opposed to the arrow function expression syntax. With this in place, our test case is now good to go. We have a great test case, and all we need to do is set up the scripts in package.json to actually run it. Before we run the test, we're going to set up the scripts just like we had in the test section. We're going to have two, test, which just runs the tests, and we're going to have a second one, test watch, which runs the test script through nodemon. This means that anytime we change our app, the tests will rerun. Right here, we'll be running Mocha, and the only other argument we need to provide is the globbing pattern for the test files. We're going to fetch everything in the server directory, and it could be in a subdirectory, which it will be later, so we'll use 2 stars. It can have any file name as long as it ends with the .test.js extension. Now for test watch, all we're going to do is run nodemon. We're going to be using the exec flag to specify a custom command to run inside of single quotes. The command we're going to run is npm test. The test script on its own is useful, and test watch simply reruns the test script every time something changes. Now there is still a major flaw we need to fix before we can move on. As you notice inside of the server test file, we make a really big assumption. We assume that there's nothing already in the database. We assume this because we expect the to-dos to be a length of 1 after adding 1, which means that we assumed it started at 0. Now this assumption is not going to be correct. If I were to run the test suite right now, it would fail. I already have to-dos in the database. What we're going to do is add a testing lifecycle method. This one is called before each. Before each is going to let us run some code before every single test case. We're going to use before each to set up the database in a way that's useful. For now, all we're going to do is make sure the database is empty. Right here, we're going to pass in a function. That function is going to get called with a done argument, just like our individual test cases are. This function is going to run before every test case, and it's only going to move on to the test case once we call done, which means we can do something asynchronous inside of here. What I'm going to do is call todo.remove, which is similar to the MongoDB native method. All we need to do is pass in an empty object. This is going to wipe all of our to-dos. Then we can tack on a then callback. And inside of the then callback, we're going to call done just like this. Now we can also shorten this using the expression syntax. Perfect. With this in place, our database is going to be empty before every request, and now our assumption is correct. We're assuming we start with 0 to-dos, and we will indeed start with 0 to-dos since we just deleted everything. I'm going to go ahead and move into the terminal, clear the terminal output, and now we can start running the test suite using npm run test -watch. This is going to start up nodemon, which will start up the test suite. And right here, we get 1 test passing. Should create a new to-do. And this is fantastic. We can verify that everything is working as expected by tweaking some values. I can add on 1 here just to prove that it actually is doing what it says it's doing. Here you can see that we're getting an error because the 2 are not equal. The same thing holds true with our status. If I change the status to something else like 201, the test suite is going to rerun and it is going to fail. Last but not least, down below, if I change this to 3, it's going to fail because we're always wiping the database. So the only correct value here would be 1. Now that we have this in place, we can add our second test case. This is going to be the test case that verifies that a to-do does not get created when we send bad data. To get started with this one, we will be using it to create a brand new test case. The text for this one could be something like should not create to-do with invalid body data. Now we can pass in our callback with the done argument and start making our super test request. This time around, there is no need to make a text variable since we're not going to be passing text in. What we're going to be doing is passing in nothing at all. Now this is going to be your challenge for the video. What I'd like you to do is make a request just like we do above. You're going to make a post request to the same URL, but instead you're going to send as an empty object. This empty object is going to cause the test to fail because we won't be able to save the model. Then you're going to expect we get a 400, which would be the case. We send a 400 back right here. You don't need to make any assumptions about the body that comes back. Last but not least, you are going to use the same format we have here, where we pass a callback to end. We check for any errors, and then we make some assumptions about the database. The assumption you're going to make is that the length of the to-dos is 0. Since this code does not create a to-do, no to-dos should be there. But for each is going to run before every test case. So the to-do that gets created here is going to get deleted before this case runs. So go ahead and set that up, make the request, verify that the length is 0. You don't need to have this assertion since this assertion asserts something about the array and the array is going to be empty. You can also leave this off since we're not going to make any assertions about the body. When you're done, save the test file, make sure both of your tests pass, and when you're done, go ahead and click play. How'd you do? That one was a little open-ended, but hopefully you were able to get it done without too much trouble. The first thing I'm going to do is call request, passing in our app. We want to make another post request, so I'll call post again, and the URL is also going to be the same. Now at this point, we are going to be calling send, but we're not going to be passing in valid data. The whole point of this test case is to see what happens when we pass in invalid data. What should happen is we get a 400. So I'm going to expect that a 400 is what comes back from the server. Now we don't need to make any assertions about the body, so we can go ahead and move on to .end, where we're going to pass in our function that gets called with the error, if any, and the response just like this. Just like we do up above, the first thing we want to do is handle any potential errors. If there is an error, we're going to return, which stops the function execution, and we're going to call done, passing in that error so the test properly fails. And now we can fetch from the database and make some assertions about the length of the to-dos collection. I'm going to use todo.find to fetch every single to-do inside of the collection. Then I'll tack on a then callback so I can do something with that data. In this case, I'll get the to-dos, and I'm going to assert something about its length. We're going to expect that to-dos.length equals to be the number 0. There should be no to-dos in the database before this test case runs, and since we're sending in bad data, this test case should not create any to-dos. Now we can call done, and we can also tack on our catch callback, which we're going to need to do just like we did above. I'm going to put a little space here, and we can call catch. I'm going to call catch, taking that error argument and passing it in to done. And now we are done. I can save the file. This is going to restart node.mon. It's going to restart our test suite. And what we should see is our 2 test cases, both of them passing. Over in the terminal, we get just that. We have 2 test cases for post to-dos, and both are indeed passing. And this is fantastic. Now, it took a little while to set up the basic test suite in this video, but in the future, as we add more routes, testing is going to be much easier. We're not going to have to set up the infrastructure up above. We're not going to need to create the test scripts or install new modules. This one took a little longer, but the future videos will not. The last thing to do is make a commit. We added some meaningful code, so we're going to want to save that work. If I run git status, you can see we have a few changed files as well as some untracked ones. So I will use git add to add all of those to the next commit. Now I can use git commit with the M flag to actually make the commit. And a good commit message for this one would be test post to-dos route. Excellent. I'm going to make the commit. And lastly, I'll be pushing this up to GitHub using git push. Now you can use git push. For this particular case, I need to go ahead and use git push force, which is going to overwrite everything on GitHub. This is only something I need to do in this specific situation. You should just be running git push. Now, once you run that, your code should get pushed up to GitHub and you are done. We have 2 test cases for our route, and it's time to move on to add a new route. The next route is going to be a GET request to fetch all to-dos. I'm super excited to get to it, so stay tuned. I will see you next time.